answering your questions about narration. Welcome to the Simply Charlotte Mason podcast. I'm Sonia Schaefer, and today my friend and co-worker Laura Pitney is here. We're going to discuss a question that we received about narration. So here's what it said. With more than one child in the phase of doing oral narration, how do I have them each do a narration on what we read together without them just copying the child that goes first? At what point do you transition into written narration, and how does that work? So we got several questions here to discuss.
For sure.
Why don't we start by backing up, and for anyone who's watching that might not know what narration is, let's talk about what narration is.
That'd be a good place to start.
All
for
right.
Sure.
Narration is basically telling back in your own words what you just heard or read. It's a much higher thinking level than true, false, multiple choice, fill in the blank. And it's like we're asking them to do many things. Pay full attention, take it all in, remember it, put it in the right sequence, mix it with ideas already in their heads, form it into coherent sentences, and then give it back to you.
Sure.
So there's a reason, I guess, Charlotte called it oral composition.
Yeah, and I think that's a huge thing to remember about why you're doing narration is it's one of those stepping stones to composition. I think realizing that by doing narration, it becomes their own possession.
Yes.
And that's what we want for our children, and that's why we do it.
Yes. It's a tool that they can use their entire lives, really, to help them learn anything.
Yeah. I remember years ago, it was so interesting the fact that oftentimes what we remember is that first narration that we told. It's not actually the real thing per se, but it's the narration, the words that we told back. And I thought about the times when my husband and I would talk about sermons. You know, we would discuss it, and then years later, I would remember that discussion
Yes.
more than the original content.
Yes,
And
the
so-
actual delivery of the
Correct,
sermon. You remember
correct.
what you said about it. Yeah.
So in my own life, I've seen the importance of that narration. So to teach our children and to do it correctly with them is lifelong for
Yes.
them.
Yeah,
for sure.
absolutely. Okay, so how does this mama do it with all these children in the oral narration phase and not just copying the first one? In my mind, there are many ways you can approach an oral narration with several children.
Yeah.
The first one, which she doesn't want to do very often, is to, line them up youngest to oldest and say, okay, youngest one go first, and now the next one. You could have them each do the whole narration again, but I think that would be a bit redundant,
Yeah.
and that's where she's coming into these problems. So another way to approach it would be have the youngest one give the narration, and then just go down the line. Do you have anything to add? Do you have anything to add? But we don't do this one very often.
They say, nope, we don't have anything else to add.
Oh, he did a great job. Yeah, we don't
Got
need
it
to
all.
add it. Yeah. So don't use that one very often. But you could also do, okay, you start, and when you get into it a little bit, then say, okay, hold it there. Who do you want to pick it up from there? And, oh, you want Joey to do it. Okay, then Joey picks it up from there. And then, okay, hold it. Who goes next? And so it's kind of like popcorn style. And the kids never know which section of the story they're
Right.
going to have to narrate. So
Right.
they've got to be paying attention to the other
Sure.
narrations as well.
Yeah, I definitely think that works well, and I've used that in my home. Leading up to that, as far as training them, I have given them a heads up to say, okay, Chloe, you're going to be the one to narrate first. So give your full attention because she's younger, 6, 7, 8, younger years to build her up for success. I have given her a heads up that she will be the first one to narrate, or she'll be the one doing this next section that we're reading. We have weaned away from that, but to build up their confidence and that habit of, like you said, listening, processing, putting it in the correct order, telling it back, I feel like that has to be mastered first in a lot of ways before we can branch out to these other methods and styles.
Yeah.
And you know your children best, for sure. So I've done it both ways to where I have let my children know ahead of time, but I've also done it that way to where, the children choose who's next. I've done it from youngest to oldest. I've done it all kinds of combinations, and they have grown in their ability to narrate for sure using those things.
That reminds me of another way to set them up for success, especially if they're having trouble with the sequencing.
Yeah, that's hard.
I think of it as shining a spotlight on the different segments of the story. So you might say, okay, at the beginning of the story, so-and-so did this. What do you remember about that part of the story?
Yeah.
And get that narration maybe from this child. And then say, okay, next in the story, this happened. What do you remember about that? And
Right.
say which child you want to narrate
Right.
that section. So you're not asking direct questions on the content. You're just saying, okay, let's take this section and you tell me about it.
Yeah.
And then this and then this.
Yeah. Giving them the keywords ahead of time
Oh, yes.
definitely helps, especially when spotlighting almost in a different way. So to give each child a person or a place or an event, that way it's the one that they're specifically looking forward to hearing about. It helps them hold that attention, even though a lot of other things are happening. It's almost become a game, like the different names, and I don't know. That has worked. Yes, that has worked well, especially when you go back to what you're saying, spotlighting the different events of the chapter or the story.
Nice. And you can also do those other methods of narration, like if you have all kids in the early elementary age and they're all doing oral narration, you could say, each of you draw a picture of your favorite part of the story. And then when they're done drawing, have them take turns telling you about their pictures.
Yep. You're going to need them to tell you about their pictures because you might not be able to tell what it is. So that usually works well with the oral part.
And you always want it to end up orally.
Yeah.
You want them
Yeah.
to be able to say something at the end. Yes, that's true.
Yeah, we've had quite the adventures in our living room as far as when we read a chapter. Some of the stories or chapters lend itself well to acting it out.
Yes.
And so this past school year, we were studying early modern. So a lot of wars happened, a lot of situations, a lot of strategic things had to be in place for other events to happen. And so we had lots of war acting out in our living room.
Reenactments.
Yes.
Historical reenactments.
And it wasn't okay just to do it one time because everybody wanted to trade roles and the people that they played, because a lot of the children actually loved being the bad guy, loved being that mischievous person that had to chop off somebody's head or something. So, but they remember that. They're able to, recall those events well. And that's one of the goals of narration.
Yes. Yeah.
Whatever that looks like.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So the other part of the question then was transitioning into written. When does that happen and how does that happen?
That's a great question. So in my home, when I know a child is getting close to the age 10, it's on my radar. Like I know it's coming. I feel like we've really tried to master the oral narration. So once they turn 10 or that school year they've turned 10, we've just had to sit down and have a heart-to-heart talk about what my expectations were, what's going to be happening. That way they're not frustrated with, okay, go write it.
Yeah,
So-
kind of hits them broadside.
Yes.
They don't know what's happening.
Yeah, so, I give
point.
them that ownership of you're maturing, you're getting older in your school years, and so this is one of the next things that you're going to get to do. And so to just kind of give them that pep talk that it's going to be okay. You don't know how to do this yet, but we're going to get there, and this is what we're going to do. So I've done that with my older ones, and it has helped not have as much lashback or the heart of heart of, oh, this is so hard, I don't want to do it. So it hasn't all happened all at once. Like I said, we've had steps. So,
Right.
we're going to do written narrations together for a while. You're going to tell it to me and I'm going to write it. And it may be when the other younger ones are busy doing something else. So I think it's a matter of knowing the end result that you want. Let's say transitioning, you want to eventually have 2 written narrations a week. That's what you want to require of your 10-year-old. So to get to them independently doing 2 written narrations a week, you're going to have to backtrack
Right.
and say, okay, let's start with us
one.
doing 1 together. Okay, and then we're going to meet together again, and it's going to be me writing, 90% of it, and then the child does the conclusion.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to
yeah.
transition in,
Yeah.
because then the child's not looking at a blank sheet of paper, getting writer's block.
Right.
And let me just throw this in, too. 10 years old is when Charlotte
Right.
recommended
Right.
we transition. But if you're starting narration with an older child,
Yeah.
you might want to start with oral first.
Yes, for sure.
Because the 10 years old mark kind of assumes that the child has become fluent in the
Correct.
oral
Yeah.
part of it.
Right.
So that's another thing to consider
Right.
when to make the transition.
Right. Knowing your child best, knowing that you feel 100% confident that they can do those oral narrations well.
Yeah.
The next natural step is to switch them over to a few written narrations a week.
And then, as you said, you could go ahead and type or write what they're saying and stop, like a sentence from the end,
Yeah.
and say, here, you finish it up. That's not
Yeah.
so overwhelming.
Right.
And then as you do that more and more, you could stop sooner and sooner and gradually
Sure.
get to where they're writing the whole thing.
Sure. One of my older daughters is, she has a flair for the dramatic. And so to transition her over to written narration, she would write plays. She would write the scripts of the story that happened, and she would give the other children their assigned roles, and they would get in costume, and she was the director of that play.
Nice.
But that was her way of doing a written narration, getting the whole family to act this scene out, which lent itself well to her just writing a normal, not a script,
A
or
narrative,
play. Yes,
yeah,
correct. So,
yeah.
for me to give her the freedom to express herself confidently in a different way than maybe ultimately what I want to get to,
Right.
really helped her transition over to not being fearful to write,
That's a great point. Because Charlotte did have her students, they would write scenes from plays, they would write letters,
Yeah.
diary entries, poetry form. So you could tailor make that to whatever the
Right.
child's really interested in to
Sure.
set them up for success, give them that boost of confidence to begin with.
That just made me think of another crazy thing she did this year. One of the stories we were reading about was a letter that one of the Americans had written to King George, and she had gotten distressed paper. I mean, she had crumpled it around the edge. She'd gotten her feather pen out. She had done it in script. She even got the wax seal, folded the
wow.
paper, and did the seal, just like in her mind she had envisioned.
Yes.
So that was her written narration
That's
for
beautiful.
that. And, I go to my school desk and I'm thinking, what in the world? Where did this come from? Why do I have a seal, a wax seal, letter here? And it was great.
That
And
was
of
a
course, that
written
goes in our keepsake box for the school
Absolutely.
year. But just her creativity, and it was great.
Along with the different styles, the script and the poetry and the letters
Sure.
and such, Charlotte also then had the children progress in the types of narrations they were writing. Eventually, your goal long term is that they will be able to write a narrative, which is tell the story. That's
Yeah.
where it starts. And then a descriptive, where they're describing how something looks or works. An expository, which is explaining something step by step. And a persuasive narration, which is state your opinion and support it.
Sure.
And those don't all happen at once.
Thank goodness.
Well, the kids get practice
Yeah.
with the narrative
Yeah.
in their oral narrations very easily. But then as they get confident with transitioning to written in those narratives, you can start bringing in a little bit of the descriptive, a little bit of the expository. It kind of depends, I guess, on the chapter
Yeah.
and what it lends
Yeah.
itself toward.
I would agree, for sure.
Yeah.
The content that you're covering and what's being discussed. Jumping back just for a second, I
Yeah.
thought of one other thing I would love to mention. It seems like the question that there was a little thread in there about, yes, transitioning children, but having multiple kids
Yes.
trying to give oral narrations. And the comment that comes to my mind, I know we're kind of jumping back, but being organized and knowing, okay, I need to spend time with this child getting this narration So my other children need to be not underfoot so that this child trying to succeed in their oral narration has my full attention.
Yeah, it's so easy if you're not organized to say, oh, we don't have time for that today.
Yeah.
Oh, we don't have time for that
Yeah.
today. And the
Or
child's
just-
left hanging.
Or just the distractions of having, multiple children in the home and trying to get these oral narrations directly after a reading when there's just crazy happening.
Yeah.
So I would love to know the answer to that because it's hard when you do want to have your children all narrate back to you. And ideally, you're doing it in a group setting. But there's also times when your children do need that one-on-one full attention from you for them to be able to give you their oral narration. So I just say that as an encouragement to figure out what works best when your children do happen to need that one-on-one attention for their oral narrations when there's a host of other children around or distractions happening. I don't have the answer for that, but I just know looking back in my homeschool, that is a challenge to figure out exactly how to maneuver all the moving pieces when, 5 kids need to give an oral narration directly after the history reading.
Right.
And
Right.
the ideas like that you mentioned about the popcorn game or going in a certain order or a lot of other, ideas for the narration, those are so handy to have. And I think we had talked a lot about the Your Questions Answered narration book.
Yes.
That has a lot of those troubleshooting type questions in there to where I have this situation, what do I do?
Yeah.
Or I have a high school and an elementary, how do I manage this? So what else would you like to mention about that? Because I know I have it on my shelf and I use it.
Yeah. It also has, in the Your Questions Answered narration book, it has sample written narrations, which I think are very helpful. Because it's like, what should I expect from this kid?
Yeah.
As they progress, when should I expect more and how much more should I expect? So it has sample narrations. It has sample narration questions.
Yeah.
A lot of getting those different types of narration, like expository and descriptive and persuasive, well, a lot of getting that is all in how you word
Yeah.
the narration question.
Yeah.
And so it has sample narration questions. And another resource for that, too, is the narration note cards.
I love those. This year was the first time we really used those. Like, they were my go-to. One of the reasons I love them so much is I did not have the time to pre-read. It's honestly
It's
on
a common problem.
the bottom of my list of things to do is to pre-read. So I could trust those narration note cards, and they gave me the confidence to be able to direct my children correctly and to have the keywords and the dates and be able to hand it to my older children for the spelling and giving them the freedom maybe to choose between question 2 or 3 or whatever
Right.
applied,
Right.
to them. So those were a lifesaver for me this year, especially having a busy schedule, busy home. That was one of the things beyond me this year that I just couldn't do. And so I definitely, those were by my side.
Oh, good. I'm
all
glad
the
they were
time.
helpful. That's great. Yeah, so I think those two resources, Your Questions Answered narration book
Yep.
and the narration note cards,
Yeah.
are going to help many mamas with
Definitely
narration.
great tools to have on the shelf, for sure. Whether you use them every day or reference them every once in a while, they have definitely been a good resource for me.
Excellent. What about you? Do you have any extra tips that are going to help with narration? Leave those in the comments. Or do you have any questions that you would like us to discuss? Leave those in the comments as well. We want to make sure we get your questions answered. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe through iTunes, Google Play, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, or your favorite podcast app so you don't miss an episode. You can also listen to the audio version of this podcast or subscribe and read the blog post on our website. All of those links will be in the notes, along with links to the resources that we mentioned. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you next time.